Hello and welcome to the new handcraft woodwork video. There'll be a voiceover for this video detailing the work that's happening and just giving a bit more background and a bit more story to what's going on. I hope you enjoy. This video will be about
creating a pair of lovely tables, and I'm cutting up a dusty old roof beam, ripping it down into pieces for the tabletop. I'm using a battered old table saw there. It's very old, but it does the job. And I'm making the planks smooth and regular with a planer thicknesser and a jointer. And now it's time for the glue up. Sometimes you can hear the kids in the background playing around and making noise. I decided not to make any joints for the top because of the thickness of the wood. I thought the glue would be sufficient. Clamping it up, leaving it for 24 hours and coming back to release the clamps. And there is the two tabletops, which I'll have to cut down in half. They're going to be round tables, so I'll cut them into two squares and then I'll cut the squares into circles. Having dust extraction in the form of a hoover is vital in my workshop because I've got a very small space in there. It's just a little workshop in the back garden that I built out of old pallets, and I have to be very organised in the space and put everything back in its place, otherwise it gets very cluttered very quick. A lot of the tools in my workshop are old tools from auction, including this bandsaw, as I was just starting out and needed some basic tools to get on with. So that is the blade just breaking there. So I had to stop at this point and change the blade. And here's a new blade. It can be difficult cutting a perfect circle, keeping the workpiece steady. On a small bandsaw like that, because it wants to topple off that small table, so you have to hold it level. Just giving it a rough sand to begin with. Get about around 100 grit, just to get the surface level and smooth. And I'll do the final sand at a later point. This is my chance as well to smooth out some of the imperfections in the circle that was cut on the bandsaw. I can sand down some ridges and bumps. I have to wear a mask with most of the power tools as it get very dusty in there. I need to protect my lungs. So I'm using a small straight cut router bit there on the trimmer, and then the guide fence to create a little indent, just about 1 millimeter or 2 thick, for some inlay, for some decorative inlay. And I'm using this paint tin as a guide to create a circle in the middle, which I will then router out, and that's for another piece of the decorative inlay. It was a learning curve doing this. It would have been more wise to start from the middle and go out, so I could still use the outside surfaces to keep the router flat and level. I went from the outside in, so when I was doing the center, the router didn't have much platform to keep level on. And I'd learned my lesson here, so I started from the middle and began to spiral outwards, which was much easier and resulted in a much more even circle. So this is the other tabletop, which will have a different design inlaid onto the top. And here I'm using a more powerful router to trim the edge, which again is a learning curve, learning the speed that the router wants to be at and the speed at which I pass the router over the workpiece in order to not burn the wood and not get breakout as well. It took me quite a few attempts on a practice piece to actually get the speed right for this grain. I was happy with the result. There was not very much burning at all, and very little breakout as well. So here's just a simple makeshift marquetry table that I made out of a piece of plywood and cut a groove into it, and that will be the first design on the table, the yin-yang symbol. I will now be making what's called a packet, which is a number of different pieces of veneer, wood veneer, very thin, different wood grains, wood species of different colours. I'll put them together and sellotape them up to keep them protected while I cut them into shape. Without the sellotape, there would be lots of kerf, which is sort of a very unpleasant line where you've cut with the saw. But the sellotape keeps it all together and makes a nice neat cut. So I'm making the packet here of the two different colours. So just cutting carefully around the edge of the circle to begin with. I'm just learning marquetry as well, so this is my second time doing marquetry. First time was the hummingbird in the previous video, which I realised I bit off perhaps a bit more than I could chew there. It was a very complex project for my first marquetry endeavour, but this one was a bit more simple. I learned my lesson. Now I was just piercing a hole with a little carpet knife to poke through the blade, which is very, very small, very thin little blade, of this jeweler's saw, or a piercing saw it can be called. So I can cut out the circles, and I'm keeping the saw at a slight angle, so when the pieces join together, the join is more seamless. And here I'm just cutting some strips for the outer ring of the pattern. Two different colours of strips. And making a packet out of the strips there, so I can cut them down into little pieces more easily. I made a big mistake at this point, which was that I didn't take the sellotape off the strips before I cut them into little pieces, which meant that I had to take the sellotape off the individual little pieces, which you can see there's quite a few, maybe 60 or so, and that took a good hour or two to do that, which was a lot longer than had I taken the strips of sellotape off before I cut them into pieces. So I'm just laying the pieces of veneer into the indentations that I made with the router, and just weighing it down to glue there. And this is the second design. This is like a nautical compass sort of design, with shaded pieces and lighter pieces. Again, a nice simple design, but it'll look very beautiful in the round table. So again, just making a packet of all the different colours that I want to use. So if I cut along the lines with all the different colours sellotaped together, then what I'll be left with is the pieces that I need at the end, and I can sort of compile them like a puzzle. I'm just trying to cut here with as few turns in the blade as possible, which will make for the neatest cuts. Okay, so I've got all the pieces and I've sellotaped them together on one side, and then on the other side I'm putting that side without tape down into the glue in the indent, and I'm just clamping this one down. This one was easier to clamp because there wasn't any decorative ring around the outside. This is the next day, 24 hours later, after it's had time to dry and settle. And I was very pleased with how it turned out. I was a bit worried with the compass design, as it was a bit smaller than the indent. I had to sort of force it in, and I wasn't sure how it would turn out. And this one I was very pleased with. And then all I had to do was peel the sellotape off the front face and it was ready. And now I've moved on to making the legs. So I've got some more of that old roof beam, which I've already cut down on the table saw and just made regular and flat in the thicknesser and the jointer. I'm just cutting them down to size to make the individual legs. And now I'm making them square on the table saw. So that's going to be roughly the length of one of the legs, and I'm just cutting it down to the right thickness here. And now I'm changing the angle of the saw blade to 45 degrees because I'm preparing these legs for the lathe. So I'm going to cut that square down into an octagon. I'm going to slice off the corners, as you'll see. Just cutting off those corners will make it far easier to turn on the lathe. And it's much quicker as well to take off that material with the saw beforehand. It also reduces the risk of a breakout on the lathe, which is where big chunks of the wood come off. If you're turning a square, then the corners will be hitting the chisel quite hard, and it can take big chunks off. So just cutting that down to an octagon, and I've done the rest for the other. There's going to be 3 legs on each table, so I've done the other 5 legs as well. I'm marking the center point there, so I can attach it to the lathe and just punching a hole down. And then I'm aligning the center point with the grip on the lathe, giving it a little knock so I can see where the teeth are, and then making indents with the chisel so the teeth of the grip on the lathe, on the spinning piece, can actually grip into these indents really nice and firmly. There you go. And that's for the other side, that center hole. So that's the teeth are gonna go in there, and that goes in the center hole, and that keeps it really nice and firm. If I don't do those indents, then it feels a bit sketchy. It feels like the piece could fly off the lathe, and I've heard some horror stories about that. Okay, so the piece is prepared. And I begin turning. Just using a standard rounded lathe chisel. Rounded one half, I'm moving into the other half now. It's very satisfying to use the lathe. It's one of my favourite things to do in the workshop actually. I'm still learning. I'm still not sure how to use the chisels to not get breakout on the wood and not get chunks flying off. So I had to sand it down a lot to actually get rid of all the little holes and indents on the wood where the chisel didn't cut the grain very well. So if anyone knows how to use a lathe and a chisel more effectively, if I'm doing anything wrong, please let me know. That'd be very helpful. So I'm just sanding it down with some 120 grit. And when it's nice and smooth, I can move on to the detail. Quite a simple design in the legs. Just marking up the center points of my design. I'm using a straight chisel there on an angle. Again, I've never done anything like this before, but I'm just giving it a go, and it seems to be turning out really well, so I was pleased with the result here. Just a simple little spherical design. Here's the other one. There's two on each leg. It's nice. It looks like the sphere's being pinched between the two pillars, top and bottom. So there we go. I've done that 6 times now. To those octagonal pieces, I've made them thicker at one end. Using some calipers, I measured one end to be about 50 mil and the other end to be about 40 mil, so they taper off. There's a lot of dust and wood chippings from that. That was only half of it from the table, actually. There's a huge amount. The shop was covered. I had to have a big sweep up after that. And now I'm just angling the top and bottom of the legs roughly 12 degrees, just to give them a little bit of a splay out when they're attached to the table. So now I'm selecting some screws which I'm going to use to attach the legs to the table. Don't worry, I'm not going to ruin the legs. I'm going to cut the heads off the screws. And then put half the screw into the top of the leg and the other half of the screw into the table. And this will allow the legs to be taken on and off easily as well, which is good for postage, which is required for these little beauties. So there we go. I'm just putting half the screw into the top of the leg, sinking it about halfway, and the other half there will go into the tabletop on the bottom. So I spent quite a while measuring out an equilateral triangle on this table, on the underside of the top, just making sure the sides were equal and the angles were equal and the legs were going to be the same distance away from the edge of the table, just to make it all look nice and even. I was using maths I hadn't used in many years, since secondary school. So this is the first time I'm putting the leg on, so I'm a bit unsure as to how it's going to turn out, and it worked really well. It turned out really well. It was nice and tight, and it was really sturdy, really secure, and there you go. And there's the other table. Just put those legs on as well. Great. They fit really well, and I was really happy with how they went on and how secure they were. I was worried that they wouldn't be very secure, but they were very secure, and I was very pleased. And the tables were level and sturdy. So now I'm just going to seal them with some oil, finish them with some oil. Some boiled linseed oil. Which I thin out there with a little bit of white spirit just to give better penetration into the wood. You can see how it's affecting the grain there. I do like the effect of it. It brings the grain out nicely. But it doesn't discolour the wood too much, which is nice. You can still see the natural colour. Quite a liberal coat there. So I applied a liberal coat, and then once it had saturated the wood, I sponged the excess off with just a cloth, and then let the rest set and dry. And doing the tops there, it was very satisfying watching the marquetry inlay. And there we go. So these tables are available on my Etsy page. Please go and check it out. I'll put a link in the description. Made out of recycled, reclaimed wood. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, thank you for watching, and please subscribe, like and share. Put any comments that you wish in the section below. Thank you everyone. See you on the next video.